Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. It is a spectacularly beautiful day here in Chicago. Just the kind of thing where you want to be outside. But if you're inside like me, I hope you're listening, and I hope you're ready for a fabulous show. It's almost a shame on this beautiful day to talk about such difficult things, but I'm going to go right to one of the most difficult because it is related to it's a foreign issue, but it's going to relate to something right here at home. I have to do this because anti-Semitism is real, but Donald Trump's supposed war on it is not. On the contrary, it's meant to inflame American animosities and give him leave to perfect the technology of autocratic rule. And to explain that, I'm afraid I'm going to start with Israel and Gaza. Forgive me, I know this is enormously painful. Look, Israel is not an example of Western colonialism, as its detractors teach. Zionism was the dream of some of the least powerful and most vulnerable people on the planet. The modern nation of Israel resulted from the determination of the really shattered remnants of a people who would no longer suffer pogroms, ethnic cleansings, and genocide. And once they had a country, the Israelis did amazing things. They turned deserts into forests, they reclaimed farmlands, they built industries and science, and created a vibrant and open culture. Israel's existence was never accepted by its neighbors, who launched several wars to wipe it off the map. And Hamas launched the current war for the purpose of stopping a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, a deal that might finally have replaced the dream of eradicating Israel with a reality based on peace and cooperation. In launching the war, Hamas soldiers slaughtered Israelis and foreign visitors alike. They killed children. They attacked concert goers at a festival. One soldier called home proudly to tell his father he had killed a Jew, and they took hostages. Joe Biden went to Israel to express his support and to caution the Israelis not to make the mistakes we made after 9/11. Bibi Netanyahu accepted that support, but he rejected the advice. And in more than 600 days of fighting, Israel hasn't won back the hostages, but it has caused one of the worst humanitarian disasters on the planet. Very likely, Israel has committed atrocious war crimes. It's charged with targeting children, of using starvation as a war tactic. We can't properly evaluate these claims until Israel allows investigators into Gaza to gather evidence. But look, meanwhile, the world has seen enough to know this war must end. Must end. And yet, it's reported that Israel is considering expelling the remaining population of Gaza and expanding this war to attack nuclear facilities in Iran. Each day further unmoors Israel from its moral responsibilities, its founding ideals, and our common humanity. Greed and ambition led Yahya Sinwar to invite this ruin upon Gaza. Greed and ambition led Bibi Netanyahu to deliver it. But my subject isn't Israel and Gaza, it's American democracy. What is this failure of leadership on both sides of that war and the ongoing horror they author have to do with our democracy? Well, more than you might think, because, look, while Americans seem not to notice slaughter in places like the Sudan or Ethiopia, well, we seem not to be bothered by terrible civil war in Myanmar or the competing warlords trying to rule what once was Libya. Conflicts between Israel and Palestine cause sharp divisions among Americans. We notice, and we act upon those divisions in ways Americans do. We engage in protest. We raise funds. We attempt to sway public opinion. And as surely as there's a debate, People are accusing each other on the other side of bad faith, of violence, and of hate. That's fertile ground for an autocrat. That's fertile ground for our own version of ambitious and greedy. Seeing that the pro-Palestinian protesters were a soft target, Donald Trump thought he could get away with using them to beta test his autocratic tools. I mean, do you really think someone in the administration reads student op-eds in student newspapers? They don't, but their surveillance technologies do. And so the administration identified Rumeyya Ozturk, a Tufts University student. She was the author of a piece that was critical of the Gaza war. By the way, I read her op-ed. It's not anti-Semitic. It doesn't call out the government of Israel in anything like the language I used a minute ago. But the administration revoked her visa, called her a threat to our diplomatic efforts across the world, and sent masked thugs to grab her off the street. But Americans, excuse me, we were appalled. There were protests. Even a judge ordered her release from federal custody. And of course, Ozturk wasn't the only target of the administration, and her case wasn't the only source of backlash. And meanwhile, weird stuff is happening. Students at Barnard received a text message from our government asking them if they were Jewish. That's creepy. Pitched as an investigation into anti-Semitism, the incident, showed us that the government has, identified everybody's cell phone number and was testing a messaging and a surveillance system. And people, again, were appalled. The administration learned a lesson. They had to find another, less visible population on whom to test and perfect their oppressive tools. They're not letting up here, but now there's a new focus. So this week, the Trump administration stopped processing visa applications for foreign students to enter the U.S. Visa applicants are less visible than visa holders already here and studying in our schools. So the administration pivoted to use the applicant pool to continue work on its surveillance tools. And they say they will use AI to identify the opinions of every applicant. That should terrify you, because let's be clear, there is no scenario where these tools aren't deployed here in the U.S. and deployed to police American thought. Look, we've seen Trump test these tools in his outreach at Barnard. We've recently learned this week, I think, that Palantir, the Silicon Valley's leading spyware, is now widely deployed across federal agencies. Already, federal courts have found the Trump administration guilty of viewpoint discrimination. That's when the government takes action against a person or a company, a law firm or a university, takes action against somebody for their opinions. It's when a government engages in viewpoint discrimination, let's use simpler words. It replaces the protection of the First Amendment with the threat that speech is only okay if it's pleasing to the administration in power. And despite multiple court rulings, Mr. Trump shows no sign of stopping. This is, homegrown fascism, and it's enabled by playing the cracks in the animosities among Americans. And look, at the very same time, they're saying they're for free speech. But they're threatening visas of Europeans who support content moderation laws in their countries. It's just a lie that that's about free speech. In fact, the strong arming of our allies in Europe is about forcing them to give big AI companies like X more data to train their AI technology, the very tech that the Trump administration is using to strip us of our basic freedoms. And so we're back to Israel and Gaza. What has happened there, what continues to happen there, is a tragedy beyond words. But here in the U.S., that tragedy and the divisions it engenders blind us to an unprecedented domestic attack. Quite possibly, Biden's support and Netanyahu's contempt led to Donald Trump's election last year. But now Donald Trump is using the continuing anguish to inflame animosities and build a massive surveillance state. He's good at finding divisions between us, making us afraid of each other, and then saying he'll police the other guy. Don't believe it. This has nothing to do with anti-Semitism and everything to do with entrenching Mr. Trump's own corrupt power. He must be stopped. But so long as Americans harbor animosities towards each other, autocrats will have room to exploit them. The way out is to remember we all share a destiny. We can be free and free to argue amongst ourselves, or we can be ruled and silenced. I'm not worried that we will make the wrong choice. For every Sherry Redstone and Brad Karp who willingly throw our freedom away for a fistful of dollars, there are millions of ordinary Americans who will not. For every partisan who hates the other side so much he would let the whole democratic experiment burn down for vengeance, there are millions who would join hands to preserve our freedom. And so we fight. I have a great show today. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to recover my voice, and Seth Kotler is going to join us when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. One of my favorite guests helped us a lot understand this moment in our history is, of course, Seth Kotler, the historian of the American right, who does his work at Willamette University, and he is back. Seth, welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, we haven't had an unusual week.
Yeah, I guess as bizarre as all of them have been in some ways. Yeah, it's hard to keep track.
Well, surely the long history of the American right wing, there have been lucid moments among the right, times when they can articulate policy ideas and those ideas are grounded in reality. But boy, this sure isn't one of them. I mean, this week I listened to Trump's senior trade advisor, Peter Navarro, sort of rant that he doesn't have to answer reporters' questions because if he doesn't like the questions and the reporter's too biased. And then he went like on this crazy ad hominem spree about, mad at everybody, but also globalist Wall Street rhinos and Democrats working together because Democrats and Wall Street have got such a history of working together. I mean, if it weren't fantasy land, he might notice these things. But is it always been the case that this right-wing movement that you've spent so much time studying has this sort of deep-seated alternate reality built into it?
The short answer is yes. But I guess I can give you a longer answer too. I mean, I guess I think of it this way, that there's always a kind of bleeding edge of the conservative movement that was that kind of farther right segment. So if we go back, for example, to the McCarthy era, right? That Joe McCarthy just made stuff up all the time. That was his MO. He abused the press. If you listen to him talk about the press, it sounds eerily familiar. Famously, his right-hand man was Roy Cohn, who basically taught Donald Trump in the 1970s how to be a public figure and how to approach the law. So that culture of just angry victimization, the sense that they were being victimized by a shadowy cabal of supposed communists who actually controlled everything, who wanted to destroy America, and only the brave Joe McCarthy could expose the nefarious, evil, terrible designs of people who, most of whom were like Adlai Stevenson. They were like center-left or centrist, kind of normal liberal Democrats. But this was the way they sought to delegitimize all of the institutions of civil society, like higher education, science, the administrative state that emerged during the New Deal, et cetera, was by turning those institutions into hostile enemies who are trying to undermine and destroy and oppress you, the poor, victimized, real American who was a white Christian American. And so that rhetorical strategy has been an animating feature of the right all along. And I think part of why we've missed it is that the story we've told ourselves as a nation is that, well, Joe McCarthy was a joke, right? Like in 1954, he got rejected, and Dwight Eisenhower, kind of rejected him, and the Republican Party rejected him. And so therefore, there was like a moment when there was this fever, and it worked for a little bit, but then we came to our senses. But that fails to note that Joe McCarthy remained quite popular with roughly 30% of the population from the 1950s on. Ann Coulter wrote a book, I can't remember what year it was, maybe 2004, celebrating put upon Bill McCarthy as the great unsung American hero. So that thread has always been there, but I think we've often thought to ourselves or told ourselves that, well, those people don't really have much power or sway.
Okay, well, so there's that thread, this conspiracy theory, detached from reality thread. Then there was, Jim Crow, which I think was different. So talk about what that thread is, and because they seem to come together these days.
Oh, for sure. Well, and they were definitely intertwined at the time as well. I mean, it's not a coincidence that Joe McCarthy is doing his work right around the time of Brown v. Board, right? And the same people who wanted to impeach Earl Warren and hated Brown v. Board were the same people who also thought the civil rights movement was part of a communist conspiracy to destroy America. And that Martin Luther King Jr. was actually a communist, they said. So these are the John Birch Society, other people on the far right. So the kind of anti-communist conspiracy theory and the idea that the civil rights movement was part of that communist conspiracy were always intertwined on the right. And so, they became detached for the more kind of mainstream opponents of the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. Like, for example, Barry Goldwater in 1964 when he ran for president, very famously, as a senator, voted against the Civil Rights Act, but also played up the fact that he was a founding member of the NAACP in Arizona and that he did not support discrimination. He just thought that the Civil Rights Act was an unjust, unconstitutional government overreach. This is how he explained his opposition to the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. So in that sense, the opposition to the Civil Rights Movement had its own, sort of roots in white supremacy in the South, as well as, all across the nation. But it was also always bound up with these kind of hysterical, conspiratorial fears about what the Civil Rights Movement was actually trying to do. There's I encourage people to go watch this. There's a debate between William F. Buckley and James Baldwin that took place at Cambridge University in 1965.
So right. I've seen it. It makes me sick to my stomach, but you're absolutely right.
It's great. I mean, in part because, James Baldwin is brilliant, right? And his articulation of what's happening in the United States in terms of race in the 1960s. But the really dramatic moments when Bill Buckley, again, who's the guy that we often think of as, the avatar of reasonable conservatism, at the very end, he and this is, I believe, right before Selma in 1965, Bill Buckley says to his British audience that he will resist the civil rights movement in the same way that the fathers of the students he's speaking to fought on the beaches of Normandy and fought on the beaches. So he equates the civil rights movement with the threat of Nazism as a civilizational threat. Which is really stunning, right? In hindsight, and also at the moment, James Baldwin's face is pretty amazing when Bill Buckley says this. But it's that sense that, like, rather than just seeing the civil rights movement as people asking for the right to vote and for the right to live as equals in American society under the law, it gets turned into this monstrous assault and attack on the very foundations of the United States as a nation, rather than an attempt to kind of realize those foundational ideals. And so the American right, since this is the mid-'60s, that Bill Buckley, not considered a wacko right-winger by a lot of people, it's this sense that, like, these movements for racial equality, et cetera, are part of some evil-intended, secretive, revolutionary effort to destroy the United States. And it's the same rhetoric that Trump and the Republicans today, it's now just ubiquitous, right? So back in the 60s, this isn't how most elected Republicans talked about the civil rights movement. The people who did tended to be Southern Democrats, not Republicans. So anyway, so today it just feels like we're still in that world of hysteria.
Let me tug on one more thread. We've tugged on the race thread, which goes. I mean, the people who say civil rights is somehow challenging our founding, they're completely wrong if our founding is all people are created equal. They're not completely wrong if our founding is the 3/5 clause. I mean, it's a deep problem here in our country. But the fantasy stuff is fantasy, conspiracy stuff, ridiculous. The other thread is a corporate power thread. Let's let the money all go to the what's the right word for this? Social Darwinism stuff that we're seeing again too. So there's a corporate power, a money part of this tradition as well, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the McCarthyism. So the groups of people who were liked McCarthy and who also were opposed to the civil rights movement, like Goldwater, their other big issue was crushing unions. So the anti-union movement was absolutely an essential piece and a really important funder of the right in the 1950s and 60s, and which is part of that kind of pro-corporate sort of tradition you describe. And for all of these folks, it's about historian Jefferson Cowie has called it racialized anti-statism, which I think is a really useful way to think about it. That it's George Wallace in Alabama in the 1960s complaining about the overweening power of the federal government, by which he's only referring to the efforts on the part of the federal government to protect the rights of black people in Alabama from being oppressed and exploited by people like George Wallace and the kind of white economic elite of Alabama. So his anti-statism didn't extend, for example, to the power of his own police force to oppress black people in the South. He wasn't a libertarian, right? He was a white, racialized anti-statist who saw the power of the state as being beneficent and good as long as he was wielding it. But whenever the power of the state showed up to say to the state of Alabama, you can't deny access to the University of Alabama to black students, all of a sudden, the cries are for freedom from government tyranny. And so I think that's been a really important piece of this, which is sometimes hard to see and hard to read because it's like, well, wait, they're saying they believe in freedom. And they really do mean it when they say it, but they mean it in a very particular coded way that is kind of hard to get at often. It's sort of hard to explain what's really going on there because people have a vested interest in kind of selectively not understanding it. And who's going to say that freedom's a bad thing? Well, of course, freedom's a good thing, right? But not freedom in the way that a lot of these folks mean it. So that when owner of a business says they want to be free to run their business however they want, in general, people are like, well, sure, like that's your business. You should run it however you want. But what they really mean is they don't want to have to deal with collective bargaining on the part of their workers.
Or environmental laws or consumer protection laws, right? I own this plant. I can bury whatever I want in my land.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's always a matter of these kind of, and this is the role of our institutions, is to kind of balance and weigh the different interests that we all have in being free. Like people should be free, children should be free to go to school without having to worry about being shot. And also people have the right to own guns. So how do we measure the freedom of individuals to have guns for hunting or whatever, and the freedom of children to go to school in a situation where their lives won't be obliterated, right? This is just the nature of what it means to live in a complex, modern, democratic society. But, obliterating that complexity is part of what Donald Trump and kind of rights rhetoric is very good at doing, and just turning this into a black and white, us versus them conversation.
Yeah, I guess part of the appeal of the to go back to the first thread, the sort of fantasy conspiracy thread, is that it allows for a much simpler view of the world. It erases the complexity of the real world.
Right. Yeah, so Kevin Phillips, who was one of the architects of the Southern Strategy, who's a Republican consultant in the 60s and 70s, said, the secret of politics is just figuring out who hates who. That's what you got to do. You got to figure out who hates who, and then double down on that and play into that. And that was Nixon's strategy in terms of his relationship to the 1960s and the student movements and the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, et cetera, is just kind of fostering those kind of hatreds amongst people in order to more easily kind of, rule over them. I think Republicans who went along with this, who weren't straight up authoritarians, justified it to themselves as, just expediency, that they weren't creating anything. They were just responding to the world as it is. So like, for example, I often think about George H.W. Bush and the Willie Horton ad that he approved. I think to give George H.W. Bush the benefit of the doubt, I don't think he was a virulent racist. When David Duke was running as a Republican, George H.W. Bush cut ads saying, "Don't vote for David Duke. This is horrific. This is, I hate this person. White supremacy is terrible."
He didn't say they're very good people on both sides. Yeah, that wasn't George H. Bush. Yeah,
right. But he also okayed the Willie Horton ad, which was a nasty racist ad, and he knew that. Right.
Yes.
And so I think the way he would have articulated that to himself in 1988 is, well, look, politics is dirty business. It's not my fault that people will respond to a racist ad. And when I put out this racist ad, I'm not actually creating any racism. I'm just, reflecting the world as it is. And why would you not take advantage of some social dynamic that is just out there that I didn't cause, that I don't like, but which I'm just going along with? And I think that's I think that mistakes the ways in which politics is actually productive of the world, productive of people's outlooks. I think Donald Trump has had a significant impact on the way millions of Americans view their fellow citizens and view the world. Right, that he has actually kind of rewired, and he didn't turn people into people who they weren't already potentially, but he kind of gave people permission to be their worst selves. It's this permission structure that the American right has sort of created to kind of perpetuate various forms of hatred, and to tell themselves that they're not actually reproducing it and recreating it and solidifying it. They're just going along with it, they might tell themselves. And I think that and now, so all the people who, when Donald Trump started running for president, all these Republicans who are like, oh, well, this guy's terrible. Like, people won't vote for him. This is not who we are. And it was like, oh, no, this is absolutely who he possibly can be. And it's who they've now become, the people who have chosen to kind of stay in the party and to support him. And that, to me, is, it's been a very long process of, reproducing these bigotries, resentments, and so on. And what Donald Trump has done is he's taken all these cultural dynamics and fed them into this institution that has tremendous power and weight in our society, our culture, and our politics, which is the Republican Party.
Yeah. I still don't fully understand this phenomenon that you're studying, because I like to think my feet are planted in the real world. I'm looking at the reconciliation bill, which, they call the big beautiful bill, but it is really, among other things, the bill that turns Project 2025 into the law of the land.
Right.
And it will take 15 million people will lose insurance. 10 in Medicaid and 5 from other cuts. The rest of us will lose hospitals that'll close. I'm just going to focus on the healthcare side of it for a second, and then there'll be an economic impact to all those people who have to leave the workforce to take care of uninsured sick. Everybody loses. And the only beneficiary are the folks who are going to get the tax cuts. And it doesn't change their lives. I mean, you give Elon Musk another $1 billion. What's he going to spend it on that he doesn't already have the money to spend everything he wants? And it's like an extra billion doesn't mean anything to somebody with that much money. They can't spend it any faster. They can't do anything new that they couldn't otherwise do. But it will change all the rest of our lives. How is this a calculation that makes any sense to anybody? And is there a corollary anywhere in our history with that?
To me, I think their goal is not, the way you just talked about it, which I agree with, is taking for granted the existence of a state who thinks that part of its responsibility is to provide health care for people who are in positions of less economic security. And that is the part that they disagree with. I mean, they don't think Medicare should exist. They don't think Medicaid should exist. And they know that they can't just say that and run on that, because that will be deeply unpopular. So instead, they talk about their concerns about the deficit, which, as you point out, the $4 trillion they're adding to the deficit would suggest that they don't actually care about the deficit or the debt. So they will, say these things because they know they're not popular. But if you were to ask them, in their heart of hearts, what do they think about Medicare? They would say that it shouldn't exist. That's not the proper role of the government. And so if that's your view of the world and of politics, then, what they see themselves as doing is just an incremental step towards what is their ultimate goal, which is basically, what Grover Norquist said, to make the federal government so small that you could drown it in a bathtub. That's been since the New Deal, basically, that has been the dream of the conservative movement and the right, which is to basically eliminate all of the parts of the federal government and of the New Deal state. So this is why, like Doge, everything that Musk was doing with Doge, that liberals and centrists look at this and feel a sense of desecration, I think. It's like, what are you doing to the state parks? Like, what are you doing to the CDC? What are you doing to all of these institutions, the National Weather Service, et cetera? And we see that and we think, that's just terrible and destructive. And I think a lot of the folks on the right are like, well, why is the government doing that anyway? We should just be getting rid of this stuff.
Let's explore that, because this idea that we're better off if we don't have a government, that government takes our money and uses it badly. So we would be better off if we just did everything ourselves. There isn't you can't work with that and not end up in the fantasy land that we started with. And I'll just take, again, public health. We said to individuals, put down the cigarette, don't smoke. It is a decision you get to make for your own health. And it took years and it didn't work very well. But we also said, oh my gosh, cholera, let's do plumbing. Not just America, but the world, right? And we got together and we built water and sewer systems that more than any single thing in the world extended human lifespan. So right, there are things that we do together that individuals cannot succeed in doing alone or can't have nearly the same kind of benefit. And right. If you play with this Republican point of view, that what happens? You can only go backwards, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the problem is the people we're talking about don't know that history, right? All they know is they turn on their water and they can just drink it and it's fine. And how did that happen? They don't think about that part.
Don't take away. Right? I don't believe in Medicare, but you can't take away my health care. What?
Right. Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a patient in the hospital dying of COVID saying there's no such thing as COVID.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, so this is where it's a problem, I think, of messaging, which is, the right-wing messaging is very simple. Like, why do bad things happen to you? It's because some evil intended person, maybe with a Jewish last name, intended it to happen to you, and they wanted it to happen to you, and they made it happen to you. So let's just get that person, put them in jail or do whatever, and then we're fine, right? And then it'll all be good. Your problems will go away. That's a much easier message than why is it that you haven't died in a plane crash recently? Well, it's because the Transportation Safety Board and the FAA has these procedures that require training for 4 years, and they have these, bureaucratic requirements for qualifications, and we have all these hoops that people have to go through if they want to make some technological changes so that we can be ensured that it will provide. You've already lost a ton of the people that you're talking to. Yeah. So the complexities of a modern society and the bureaucratic structures that are necessary to kind of make it function are incredibly unsexy, and they often fail, right? They're not often, but sometimes they don't work. And of course, whenever they stop working, there's a ton of attention to that. But we don't know. How do you tell the story about all of the nuclear explosions that haven't happened? Because all those people in charge of the Department of Energy of ensuring that our nuclear plants don't blow up, those people have been doing their jobs, and it's all been invisible. But then when, Elon Musk fires them, and then suddenly he realizes, oh, wait a minute, maybe we need those people to stop nuclear reactors from blowing up. Okay, let's hire them back now. It's so indicative of Musk's kind of adolescent view of the world, but also this broader right-wing vision of what enables the world to kind of function. And as they see it, it's just like great souled men like these billionaires who run the world. And then it's just freedom juice. It's just like basically everybody doing whatever they want. And anytime a government gets in the way of someone like Elon Musk or some other corporate executive, they just scream and kick and yell that they're being oppressed. And so,
but that's now, again, let's go. That's not new. You've looked at this, and this has been the same dynamic through our whole history, and yet we have made progress. How is that? How did we progress through it before, and what lessons are there about that we should think about right now?
Right. Well, I mean, in part because, for the most part, the people who are in the Republican Party and who are engaged inside the building, I'll just talk about Oregon to give an example, because it's what I know the most about.
Yep.
Republicans in Oregon, when they're inside the state house, most of them act like completely normal legislators. They read the bills. They care about the evidence. They make good arguments. They ask good questions. And then when they walk outside the building, or they're talking to the press, or they're talking to voters, they talk about George Soros wanting to destroy America and how he's really in charge of the Democrat Party that hates you and wants to destroy freedom. They know that's not true because they sit inside these committee hearings with their Democratic colleagues. And sure, they probably hate some of them, but they know most of them don't want to destroy Oregon, right? They know most of them are very, pro-business, right, in terms of, bringing jobs to the state of Oregon. But in terms of all of the signals that they are being given by the National Republican Party and also the kind of messaging that their voters want to hear is this kind of apocalyptic rhetoric. And so historically, so for example, to go back to George H.W. Bush and the Willie Horton ad, George H.W. Bush understood the complexities of furlough programs and so on. Yes. And I'm sure he could probably have a conversation about the complexities of our carceral system and how it functions. But for the purposes of winning an election, you to say Michael Dukakis furloughed a black guy who raped and murdered a white woman. There you go. We win, right? But George Bush, as a legislator, as someone who was involved in the process of governance, didn't engage the process of governance in that same just vicious, nasty, cynical way. But that is exactly the way Donald Trump approaches it. That is exactly the way most Republican legislators today approach it, because that's what their leader is telling them to do. Right? There's absolutely no incentive for Republican legislators at the federal level to be reasonable, compromising people. All the incentives are pushing in the other direction. So to my mind, it's a profound dysfunction inside the Republican Party as an institution that has come to see itself and understand itself as just anti-everything, anti-government, any kind of institution like higher education, anti-journalism, anti-science. And once you're in that place, it's hard to see how you get out of that. And I don't know, if they can't even agree that climate change is real, how do you write a bill in terms of our energy policy that it would involve people from a different perspective? And so that to me is the real. That's what has really changed, is that the Republican Party has become this kind of Borg of a unified vision that is just hostile to the very project of sense-making, truth-making, and governance in a complex modern society.
Okay, for those of you who are listening, there was a Star Trek reference in there hiding, and 10 points if you call later and can identify it. So that's really terrifying, because the question I asked was, we've overcome this stuff in the past. What lessons are there from the past that are going to help us right now? And your answer was, sorry, we haven't had an experience where one of the two political parties is completely hostile to the idea of American government and American democracy. That's new, and there's no room for independent thought in it at all.
Yeah, I wish I didn't have such a dark. I wish I could have happier news, but based on, when people talk about the Klan, for example, in the 1920s, the America First movement of the 1920s, and the Klan that was opposed to immigration and so on, the defining features of the Klan, which was very powerful and influential at the local level in various communities and states even, but they were totally ecumenical in terms of what party they would work with. They didn't care if you were Democrat or Republican. So in some states, the Klan tended to be more Republican. In other states, it tended to be more Democratic. And so you couldn't say that the Klan was just lined up with one political party or the other. And so the Klan embodied all of those same conspiratorial, illiberal, racist, anti-immigrant kind of energies that we see in today's Republican Party. But the difference was that, if you were talking about Oregon, that tended to be more Republicans than Democrats, but there were plenty of Democrats who were involved with the Klan. If you were in the South, it was very much a Democratic thing, not that many Republicans.
Yep.
And so the way that the way those energies, those liberal energies, feed into the political system, they just get dispersed because they're spread across the different. There are all these cross-cutting.
It's more of a cultural phenomenon than a political one. Right. And now we've turned it. We've embodied it in our politics. I guess the only answer is to treat the Republican Party someday, if we have the chance, as the party itself, not the people, but the party. We'll have to find it as law breaking, which it is, hostile, criminal enterprise, charge it with racketeering, put it out of business, and let America form a new right of center political party that believes in the country.
Wow. I mean, it's hard. I'm a historian. I'm not a not a legal scholar or a political strategist. That would be quite a dramatic thing to do, and might end up even more of a backlash than it was intended to prevent.
I've always thought, for instance, been to Berlin, very brave about their own past. They turned the Nazi symbols into teaching moments. Robben Island got turned into a teaching moment from being the prison for Nelson Mandela. And I just think, we have to do things like that. We have to take Mar-a-Lago and turn it into a museum of American fascism and just take those symbols of their power and say, what, we have to learn from this.
Yeah, I mean, and that process was always incredibly contested, even in Germany, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, they're just fixes to this kind of thing. Like there really aren't. And in terms of, in Oregon, our experience has been that, like, the way we've dealt with the kind of radicalization of the Oregon Republican Party is that voters have just rejected it. They just don't win elections. Because voters are like, wow, you people sound nuts. We don't want to vote for you. And so that's, in some ways, I'm sort of insulated from a lot of this. And I think, Illinois, you have a similar kind of dynamic, in the state of Illinois.
We do. But around me where it's close, like in Wisconsin, like in Michigan, like in Ohio, what the Republicans are engaged in, because they know they're not popular, is voter suppression and changing the rules so that even elections aren't sacred to these guys.
Right. Yeah. No, the voter suppression. I mean, so, ultimately this was in run up to the 2024 election. My hope was that voters would just deal with the problem the way voters in France did, or the way voters in Germany have, or, in other places. And they just didn't. Our fellow citizens let us down, right? And voted for this guy. And the best way to get out of this in a democracy is with more democracy, right? Is to win over, the hearts and minds of people to vote out a party that, they've called the question. Like, the Republican Party has called the question, right, in terms of, like, what do they think about America and what sort of country are we? And I feel like this creates space for an opposition party to say, like, okay, you all have called the question, so this is what you said you think America should be. You think it should be a Christian nation. You think it should be a white nation. You think it should, be a nation in which the president gets to do whatever he wants and isn't held accountable for checks and balances. We disagree, right? This is our idea of what America is, and if you agree with us rather than them, you should vote for us. I wish I felt more confident that the majority of voters would make the right choice.
I am confident that the majority of voters will make that choice and make it well. But what I'm not sure they'll have the opportunity because they are creating this dual state where some of us live under a nation of laws and the Trump administration does not. It has a space in which to operate that's different than the rest of ours because it is extra legal. And that happens in fascist places all the time, where they're just not held accountable, and we are, and it's an enormous obstacle for us to overcome.
It is. I mean, the good news is that the courts, I think the last I checked, it was something like 93% that the Trump administration is losing 93% of the cases in the courts. Whether they'll actually abide by those rulings is another question. But, what they're doing is just so gratuitously unconstitutional and illegal, and that's what the courts have been finding one after another, Republican-appointed judges and Democrat-appointed judges. So, I don't want to be overly optimistic about that the courts will save us, but the courts are, to a great extent, kind of doing their job, right? They are upholding the rule of law and the Constitution, and I guess we'll see how much power Trump and his people have to just power through that, right, and impose their will regardless, right, of those constitutional barriers.
Yes, and I have. They may transform the country in doing it. The judiciary has definitely done its job. The Supreme Court, John Roberts and his court, I think don't want a lawless country. I think they want the country to change, but in a lawful way. So I don't think they want to create that lawless space that I was talking about a second ago. And I think they will fight that. But they are hostile to voting rights. John Roberts hates the Voting Rights Act. He's hostile. I mean, he's all for anti-union corporate power. He does not believe that government has any role to play in racial relations in America. And so he can. They may give us an opportunity by holding back the lawlessness, but they certainly would like to change the country by changing our laws.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think they would be happy to see most of the post-New Deal administrative state completely destroyed. And so if that happens, as a modern, complex society, what it would look like to not have meaningful environmental regulation or public health processes or, anything like that, to basically just obliterate the capacity for the federal government to engage in such regulatory action would be just an enormously different country, like kind of an unimaginably, like a kind of libertarian dystopian nightmare, basically.
Yeah, I think that's when you say, well, we had a great run for a couple hundred years, but it's time for the rest of the world to lead.
Yeah,
and humanity will have to look somewhere else. Yep.
I think for Roberts, and again, he doesn't think he would be creating a libertarian dystopia. He thinks he would be creating a world of freedom. But I think he's wrong. So in that sense, I think these folks are very much captive to this kind of extreme ideology that has structured the conservative movement, since the New Deal, basically. And they see Trump as this kind of force in history that can deliver to them all of this unpopular, kind of destructive action that they couldn't.
I have to interrupt you, Seth, because we are we've run to the end of our time here. But just I just want to like this is a really interesting conversation, and what it says to me is that the Republican Party, that the right wing movement that you have studied has always had in it these strands, and these strands have come together and reached their conclusion. They've gone as far as they can go, and they've ceased to be meaningful in a way that is a force for any good in the country. All they can do is destroy now. So that's the end of their game. Whatever those logical problems in the beginning, they've created this disastrous monster in the Republican Party that will either kill. I mean, Sean Casten, representative said to me last week, either democracy will kill the Republican Party or Republican Party will kill democracy, and we're in that race right now.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Susan Demas is here. She is the executive editor at Lincoln Square Media. That's the media company that is connected to the Lincoln Project to make them into a news organization, not just the one that makes those videos that you've seen all the time. She edits and publishes a ton of interesting pieces, and she produces her own video podcast that covers topics that, you guys who are listeners to this show will find familiar, even some of the same guests, which is so much fun because we really need to get the ideas that we talk about here out into the world in as many ways as possible. Before that, she was founding editor of Michigan Advance, and you know how partial I am to this Great Lakes point of view. Susan, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me, and it's always nice to talk with a fellow Chicagoan.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I want people to understand the evolving media landscape, as hard as that is, and sort of the efforts to counter what has been a generations-long right-wing message machine. So talk about Lincoln Square Media, its origins, and its growth arc.
Yeah, so, I have spent about 25 years in journalism and, worked at many mainstream media outlets, worked in the nonprofit media sector. But I've been really intrigued to see all this growth in independent media. Obviously, Substack is a huge platform. That's one of the platforms that Lincoln Square is on. But you're just seeing a lot of journalists and a lot of new outlets cropping up to try and fill some of the void out there. It's not that there's not a lot of political media. It's just that a lot of it is just for insiders, for, corporate executives. And a lot of it is firmly on the right. And so getting good information out, pro-democracy media that, does not kowtow to Trump, people who are not interested in joining the White House press corps and getting called on and all of that, but just want good information to get to people. And I think that's a real opportunity for us. I love independent media. I love nonprofit media. There's still so many talented journalists that are out there in mainstream news. But it's been interesting to see that a lot of mainstream journalists seem to have found some freedom this way, like Katie Fang, who used to be on MSNBC, Jim Acosta, who was on CNN. We don't have to worry about corporate owners breathing down our necks and telling us what we can and can't report. And I think that's really vital. Really vital. And I think it is a separate conversation, but it goes to a real flaw in the current iteration of our form of capitalism, that corporate owners are so willing to give up on the mission of journalism, give up on the mission of democracy in order to curry favor so they can sell a company, buy a company, get a contract. Very dangerous. Right, and especially when so many of the media corporations have vast other interests. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, but obviously that's not his bread and butter. So he needs to protect that, and so therefore he'll curry favor with Trump through his newspaper. Yeah, and I wish they would understand, but maybe people with so much money think they have too much to lose, and so they stop learning. But really, truly, there is no deal any of them can make with Donald Trump that Donald Trump will honor. It's like, okay, that was yesterday. What are you going to do for me today? Right. Yeah, everybody thinks that they can cow Donald Trump, and that never seems to work for anyone. No. All right, so I had a question. It's sort of relevant to this moment's news. Why do we let the right lead in every discussion? And
the example, the best one I have right now, is that we are talking about the big, beautiful bill. And on our side, we're saying about the big, ugly bill. And we can talk about all the things that are terrible with it. But really, truly, it is Project 2025 written into law. Why aren't we saying that? We've spent years educating America about Project 2025. The right is running away from it. They pretended they weren't interested in it. They lied about that in the campaign. Now the executive branch has been implementing it. This bill is Project 2025 becomes the law of the land bill, and nobody's saying that. We're calling it the big, beautiful bill. We're using their language. Why?
Well, I think the right has always been, very effective at framing things in a way that is simple. It hits you emotionally. And then the media, for so long, the mainstream media, goes along with their framing because the worst thing that you can be called is biased, if you work for the corporate media. And Democrats never stop to say, hey, this framing is ridiculous. Let's have our own framing. Let's fight it. I think a perpetual mistake is fighting on that ground. And,
Me too.
I think you're correct that talking about Project 2025 is potent. I think now is not the time to be real subtle with things. Rick Wilson, who, is one of our big talents, who writes for us on Lincoln Square and, has a podcast. He calls it the MAGA murder bill. So does Joe Trippi, who, is another one of our big writers. Does that kind of appeal to, those of us who like long white papers? No, but it's certainly a lot more memorable than the big ugly bill. You'll just end up remembering the big beautiful bill, and you'll think, oh, it can't be that bad. And I was really distressed to see that, a lot of the Democrats in the House, I think it was Hakeem Jeffries' majority fund said, don't use the language MAGA murder bill. We don't want to be too sensationalistic. I mean, literally, people are going to die without health care. This isn't an abstract thing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think now is the time to ring the alarm bell.
15 million people will lose their health insurance because of this bill. 10 million from Medicaid, another 5 million from the ACA tax credits they're getting rid of. And it doesn't just affect the people who lose their health care coverage because hospitals will close. So people can continue to have a health insurance they won't have a hospital to go to. And their own premiums are going to go way up because of it. So all of this impacts everyone. And Susan, for what? I mean, this is so that you can give another tax break to the top 1%, the wealthiest people in the country. And honestly, an extra $1 billion for them isn't going to change their lives. I mean, what can Jeff Bezos buy with another $1 billion that he can't buy with what he already has? He can't eat more food in a year. He can't take more trips in a year. He can't spend it. So doesn't this tax cut for these people doesn't change their lives, but it wrecks all of ours.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, this isn't just, a welfare program, which is what Republicans keep wanting people to believe about Medicaid. This is a healthcare program. There are plenty of people on Medicaid who work. It's just that they don't earn enough money to they earn so little that their jobs don't give them health insurance, or, it would be, a huge chunk of their income to buy health insurance, themselves. And so, you've got that. You've got a lot of seniors that rely on Medicaid for their nursing home care. And so all of a sudden you're going to have, grandma and grandpa coming home and somebody's going to have to take care of them. This affects all of us. And I just don't know that it's a real popular message to say everybody's health care gets worse. Your hospital down the street is going to close. But, hey, at least Elon could buy another rocket.
Yeah, but he can buy the rocket anyway. It literally makes no difference to these rich people. None. They're just doing it to spite the rest of us.
And it doesn't decrease the deficit at all. Ostensibly, Republicans are always supposed to, cut spending. And that was a huge thing that they hit Biden and Harris on was, the deficit went up. We have too much inflation. We have to cut back. Well, they're cutting back, but only on programs that help people. As far as shoveling out money to billionaires and increasing the deficit that way, they're fine with that.
Right, and they'll build an internal prison system for 100,000 inmates so they can go ahead and disappear people off our streets in vast numbers. This week, the Supreme Court said they could, in fact, change the immigration status on, I forget the number, some enormous number of 300,000, I think, people overnight. And they did it in one of those unsigned, decisions where they don't have to explain why it's legal.
Right.
Crazy.
Right. The shadow docket, which is how they do so many things that are just vastly unpopular.
Yeah, this is a court that said there's a major questions doctrine that other branches of government have to cope with, but not them. Under the cover of darkness, they can make major rulings and not even tell us that, not show us their work. Look, I know that Americans are frustrated. It feels like the government is not doing its job for us. And I know you had a nice chat with my friend David Pepper recently about how that started in the states with gerrymandering so that the state legislators aren't really working for the people anymore. They're working for the guys who draw the maps. They're working for the guys with the money. And so democracy isn't delivering. I'm guessing you think, as well as I do, that good journalism, that journalism that makes clear the impact of governing decisions can help us clear the debris and restore a more functioning government.
Absolutely. I think one of the major issues in the last election was just the flood of disinformation. And the main engine of that is on social media. And it's not just, bad news sites, troll farms, clickbait, but it's the stuff that gets passed on from your friends and family because, at this point, very few people really look at the sourcing on things. That's something I do. I'm sure you do. But, when you're scrolling through, if it looks legitimate, they've got, a very nice picture of Trump. That must be a news organization. And, it was shared to me by my best friend. So that carries weight with people. And, I think that we need to be telling stories in more compelling ways. I think what we do at Lincoln Square might be different than, what other journalists do at the Washington Post. We do a lot of commentary. We do a lot of in-depth interviews with, people who are experts in their field, with, members of Congress, and, trying to get answers and, look at things beyond just the surface. But, we all have to contend with the fact that it's so easy for disinformation that's free to circulate into the bloodstream before anyone is going to open up a 2,000-word article that is excellent and very important, on issues like health care. But how do we communicate to people so that they know what's really going on, not the lies that benefit select billionaires like Elon Musk? And so I'm really heartened to see, that there are a lot of news organizations like Courier, for instance, and it's certainly something we do at Lincoln Square where, we use the information that we have for our longer form pieces and videos, and we put that on Instagram Reels, on TikTok. We're on Reddit. We're trying to reach people in different ways because, we know that all of the disinformation and propaganda is readily available.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I continue to do radio, because it's free for people to listen to. They don't have to pay to get past the paywall. We can get people information. We can get it to them at no cost to them.
Right. And, for what we do at Lincoln Square, we have a lot of content that is totally free because, we want good information to get out there. But, we do because, I do like being able to pay my staff. That's important.
Absolutely.
We do have a paid membership tier, and we do have, more programs available, more columns available. And honestly, what we tell people is, we understand that not everyone who really needs to hear this can afford it. People are seeing the fact that inflation isn't going anywhere. Interest rates for houses keep going up. I thought Trump was going to fix all that. Apparently not. And with this bill that might very well pass the Senate, we're all going to feel that. That's going to impact all of us, his tariffs. And so, if you can afford to help us with a paid subscription, that means that we can keep information and these really fascinating interviews and columns, more of that available for everyone. So I appreciate that. And, having more of a sense of community like that, I think is important. I feel like that's something that we've lost a lot. And that's definitely something that I feel like the right wing and Donald Trump want to continue to kill. They want us to be divided on everything. Realizing that, we have a lot more in common than we don't. We don't have to agree on everything, but, we do agree on our democratic system and the rule of law. To me, that is enough right now, and we can get into those nitty-gritty policy decisions and make things better as soon as we, get past this big flashing red light for us to become like Hungary or Russia and a full-on autocracy. We absolutely cannot let that happen because that is very difficult to get out of.
Yeah. All right. So let me just, I want to go there, but I want to go back for 1 second. I don't mean to say you shouldn't charge for your premium subscription. I think you should. And I think people who are listening who can afford it should sign up for it. I applaud you for keeping things unpaywalled that are important for everybody to see, but journalists need to be paid. So I applaud you for that. And if you're listening and you can afford it, you should sign up for their premium product. It's very good, and it'll make you a more articulate and informed advocate in the next year. Now to your point about we don't want to be turned into an autocracy, which I think they have. We are already fighting to get out of it. I wonder, the Lincoln Project began. I'm going to say these words. You may object, but as a never Trump project.
I think that's absolutely true.
Right, and never Trump is. I'm like, okay, well, not only not never, but twice. So I think I am seeing a transition from never Trump to a transition, and I don't just see it in the never Trump world. I'm seeing it in other worlds as well, of an alignment on some very fundamental and very American ideals. The idea that we didn't make this bargain in order to have a king. We believe in the institutions of our democracy, and we object to the raping and pillaging of them by the MAGA crowd, whether that is the judiciary or all of the offices of the executive branch when you fill them with morons and hacks. So I think we are seeing a coming together in something that is has a more going forward agenda and set of ideas than never Trump.
Absolutely. And I think the Lincoln Project has become a much more of a big tent organization, since its founding as well, where it was, Republicans who, could not stand Donald Trump, which is admirable. But, Joe Trippi is a longtime Democrat. He ran Howard Dean's, progressive campaign in 2004 for president. He's on our board at Lincoln Square. And, there are a lot more people who, are from all sides. They span the ideological spectrum, but we all believe American democracy is a fundamental that cannot change. Basic human rights are non-negotiable. The rule of law cannot be fully compromised the way that Trump is doing every day. And that's worth fighting for. That's worth putting aside any differences that we have on what the marginal tax rate should be, and all of those fights. And so, honestly, I look forward to a day where we can, fight about that again. But we're not there now. And I think that it takes a lot of people who are not going to agree on everything, but agree on the big stuff to get through this moment.
Yeah, and that's why organizations like yours are so important, because you're helping make possible the coming together of a democratic, small d democratic culture. And we took it for granted for so long in America that we stopped being that. We were an economic culture. We were an artistic culture. We were a sports-loving culture. But we didn't think about our small d democratic roots and any of what that means. And now that it's threatened, you guys are helping people understand what that means and what is required to keep it going.
Yeah, and I think that it's really heartening for me to see, every week we do a news roundup and we will mention, protests, the No Kings protest, and the 501 protests. Things that are very progressive led, but, it doesn't matter that, the Lincoln Project may have, people who, aren't as progressive. We understand they're organizing, they're fighting back. That's important. And I think that the more people who want to get involved, the better. And that means, people who voted for Trump, because, there are a lot of people who voted for Trump. They were expecting prices to go down. They just felt probably after the pandemic that things were splitting apart, and he had a simple message and maybe it was appealing for whatever reason. But there are a lot of people who are not really happy about people being snatched off the street randomly. And they're not liking when you go to Walmart and all of a sudden, the price on something you bought last week is a lot higher this week. So everyone needs to be welcome because, we need to fight back, and the 2026 election is really a long way away. So we have to sustain this fight before we get to that point where hopefully we can vote for better leadership, at least in Congress.
Yeah, well, and part of that fight is defeating this horrible piece of legislation that would cause such permanent damage. And a permanent damage to the country. You can't just fix this by winning the next election, because when stuff is broken, really broken, it takes a long time to fix. It's not like, they walk left, we can walk right, or they walk right, we can walk left. They're literally breaking the fundamental institutions that keep us safe and our economy moving forward.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on the
everything
environment.
from...
Climate change is irreparable damage, what they're doing.
Yes, and scientific research, cancer research, massive cuts to our national parks. These are very serious changes that Trump has been pushing through. And so, he is aiming to fundamentally alter every aspect of American life and make it worse. And so, we need to fight back. If we can kill this bill, that will be a huge way to put the brakes on what he wants to do. Because, rather than try and get things done in individual bills, he wanted to jam it all into one where he just needs a simple majority and ram it through. And, we all know that when autocrats are told no, they don't really know how to react to that. So this would be the time to put the pressure on your senators, whether they're Democrat or Republican.
Right. If they're against the bill, they have to fight harder. If they're for the bill, they got to change their mind. And that is pressure we can apply. All right.
Right.
Would you tell people who aren't familiar with Lincoln Square how to find you, how to become part of that community, how to get the most benefit?
Yeah, so we are at lincolnsquare.media, and we post on Substack. That's where you can find our main website. But all of our podcasts and our videos are on YouTube. Any social media channel you can imagine, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, yes, even still Twitter. We just want to reach people everywhere. And so, you can find us there. And if you want to sign up for a paid subscription, it's only $10 a month. Otherwise, we welcome you to subscribe for free. Check it out, see, if you like it. But I do think that it's more than just, we're a news outlet. We do live chats with our subscribers, and it's nice. Like I've only been in this job for a little more than a month, but I know people, in the chat. It's a community, and people are like, oh, this is what we're doing in my community. And somebody says, oh, that would be a good idea for me. And that's important.
Very important. Thank you so much for doing it and for spending some time with this community today.
Oh, I so appreciate you having me on.
We'll do it again then, Susan. We'll do it again.
Great. Thank you.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. I started this show a few years ago, and we focused a lot on the Great Lakes and on stuff going on in Washington. And then I got interested in, and we spent a lot of time in the politics in North Carolina. And most of our conversations have been where the politics have mattered a lot. But some of you know I've spent more time now talking to folks in Mississippi, not because it's going to vote in any way that's going to change the country, but because I think we can't heal the country if we don't pay attention and don't understand. And some of the most remarkable writing, just things that we need to better understand about ourselves, is coming from, like the little engine that could, the Mississippi Free Press. And Ashton Pittman is the award-winning news editor of the Mississippi Free Press, and he is joining us now. Ashton, thank you for spending some time with me today.
Thank you. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Look, I want to talk about a bunch of things, but what made me want to reach out and talk to you first was you guys you edited a remarkable story about family and an ICE raid, and it bears telling. Could you tell that story?
Yes. So this is a story about an ice raid in Sturgis, Mississippi. Well, not an ice raid. It's a man from Sturgis, Mississippi, who was arrested by ICE. His name is Casper Erickson. He came to Mississippi as a teenager, as an exchange student for a school program in Starkville, Mississippi. Um, met the met the girl he fell in love with and came back, married her, and her name is Savannah Erickson. They're now in their 30s, and they have been building a home and a life here together for a decade and a half. And he has been working on his citizenship for years, and he actually thought he was about to become a citizen when he went to Memphis in early April to for an interview for a citizenship interview. He thought he was right at the end of the process, about to finally become a citizen. They have 4 kids. They have a fifth one on the way in August, and instead of that meeting resulting in his citizenship, when he got there was a U.S. Marshal there, and ICE arrested him. Uh, and it was all because of a form that he had missed sending in 2015. So we're talking, we're talking a decade ago, and for some reason, ICE had never caught this. Immigration officials had never caught this. It should have been something he could have fixed easily. The time when he missed it, his wife had just had a miscarriage of what would have been their first child. So they were really distraught, and he missed it. But there's supposed to be a remedy process for that. But he didn't find out about that until he went to this meeting and was arrested 10 years later. So he was never given a chance to fix it. Immigration services have been telling him for the past decade everything looks good, he's well on his way, and suddenly he's arrested. And he told our reporter Nick Juden, who wrote this masterful story, that if this had happened a few months ago, we would not be arresting you. But because of the new administration, we had to treat you this way. And this has been an ordeal they've been going through for several months. He is still in a ICE detention facility in Louisiana, the same one where Mahmoud Khalil is. And he's just waiting to find out if they're going to deport him back to Denmark. So we're talking about a man from Denmark who, has a job, family, doing everything, right. He made a mistake. And, a lot of people have pointed out that this is a white man, and that's true. And part of the reason we told this story, we would tell the story regardless of whether he was a white man or not. But, one of the things that makes this story important is it illustrates that no one is safe from ICE. You can't be the, just because you might think you are, the perfect European immigrant or whatever people may think, nobody's safe. Yes, the Trump administration has prioritized going after brown people and, these racist crusades against Hispanic people. But that doesn't mean that if you're a white immigrant that you're safe from ICE. They are, what's become clear is that there is Trump cannot achieve the mass deportations he promised just by focusing on people who are in this country illegally or who have committed crimes. That's become clear. So what's happened is they are now targeting as many people as they can based on things like paperwork errors that in the past, they would have been allowed to remedy, to up those numbers and try to get anywhere near, the kind of numbers he has promised. So this is a really important story. A lot of people wanted us to have asked us why we reported this story, and we haven't, reported a similar story so far this term on any Hispanic immigrants in Mississippi who have been in these situations. And one of the reasons, I'll tell you, and Nick is actually trying to work with some people to tell some of these stories, but is that Hispanic immigrants, there's a lot of fear for all these immigrants. Even with Casper Erickson, it took Nick several weeks to be able to talk to the family. But there's just this heightened fear, especially for immigrants from South America, of retaliation from the Trump administration, which we've seen, and it's hard to tell these stories a lot of times. But we were able to tell this story after Nick built trust with the Ericksons, and was able to interview his wife and him from his ICE prison. So we don't know what's going to happen with the Ericksons. We don't know if he's going to be home for the birth of his fifth child, or if he's going to be deported to Denmark, and if his family is going to have to try to figure out if they can, immigrate there. It's really up in the air, and it's just one of many, many tens of thousands of cases going on around this country. That just illustrates how nobody is safe in this situation.
Certainly, this is not an example of, I'm going to get those criminals who are in our country, those dangerous people, off our streets. There's no indication that this guy was a danger to anybody. He had a job. He was paying his taxes. All of the above.
Right. And his boss actually had planned to retire in a few years and give the business to him, because he says that Casper Erickson is the only person who's able to take it over. So that's also another, thing that's thrown up in the air for someone else tangentially related. Like, these things have effects on communities, not just the immediate family.
You said that he runs the risk of being deported back to Denmark. But does he also run the risk of being deported to a third country, which we're seeing so often? Could he be sent to a country in Africa? Could he be sent to a country in Central America? We see the government sending people wherever they can get contracts to take them.
And that's a worry. I'm sure for everyone. If you asked me today, I would say, of course, of course he's going to be deported back to Denmark. But that, if you'd asked me months ago that, if he was going to be deported, of course, Denmark. But we've seen the Trump administration, a year ago, if you had said Venezuelans are going to be deported to a foreign country they've never been to a terrorist prison, torture prison, essentially, people would have said, well, that's crazy. So, we really don't know. I think a lot of it's kind of easy to say, well, he's a white immigrant, so he'll be deported back to, his own country, his home country. But, I don't think it's safe to assume that at all. Just like it's not safe to assume that white immigrants from Europe are any more safe than any other immigrants. Like, certainly there's not the same, racist component of it, but you can be a white immigrant and end up in an ICE prison. So why couldn't you be a white immigrant and end up, deported to Africa, or deported to a South American country you've never been from?
Yeah, it's not possible to have mass institutionalized cruelty that exists within a somewhat lawless administration and expect anybody to be safe. They, even if they think they have a target, they can't hit that target. They're not that good. They're gonna spray everybody. They're gonna be collateral damage all over the place, and innocent people, not just. These guys aren't getting a day in court. At least the man you wrote about acknowledges there was a mistake on his naturalization process, but other people don't even get a day in court to make that. They may not even be immigrants.
Right. And, I would also, if you don't mind, just like to also say that One criticism we have gotten from this story, there's been a lot of praise for Nick's reporting because he just did a wonderful job. Even Bill Kristol wrote that it was Pulitzer-worthy reporting. But we've also gotten a lot of criticism from people who are upset that Nick didn't interrogate the Ericksons' political views. There are some posts they made or retweets they made years ago that suggest they may have supported Trump, that they opposed Biden. And a lot of people have wondered why we didn't go into that and ask them about that. And, it was not on the top of Nick's mind to talk to a man in an ICE prison about his, past political views or how his wife may have voted, since he himself, of course, couldn't have voted. But it's also, we wouldn't ask any ICE prisoner to talk about their political views, because the point is this shouldn't happen to anyone. No one should be able to vote in a way in this country that this can be a reasonable outcome. Voting, of course, does have consequences. Elections have consequences. We should be clear about that. It is because Trump is in office that this is happening, and he was clear in the story. But I also think that a lot of people who have only ever lived in liberal and left-leaning enclaves sometimes have a hard time understanding that those of us who live in rural places like Mississippi, like rural Mississippi, like me, I'm a gay white man, and I have to live in community with people who support Trump, voted for Trump, and a lot of people have assumed that the Ericksons, they voted for these deportations. I have no idea what what was in their mind. Like I said, I don't even know if they voted.
He didn't. He didn't.
Right. I don't know if she voted. I know he didn't, because that would be illegal. And it's actually not as easy to illegally vote in this country as people think it is. No. One point I try to make is that, it kind of goes back to what Hillary Clinton said in 2016 that made a lot of people angry. When she said that among Trump supporters, there's kind of a basket of deplorables who are racist and hateful and terrible. But what she also said was there's another basket, and I actually see this in my whole life. A lot of people who voted for Trump are people who aren't very deep into politics, especially in places like where I'm from, are people who aren't very deep into politics. They vote for people like Trump because in the world they come from, it's considered the good thing or the Christian thing to do. And we can quibble with that and point out all the logical fallacies of that. But the fact is, a lot of people who voted for Trump have never thought deeply about the consequences. I was, until my early 20s, I'm 35 now, but until my early 20s, I was pretty conservative because I grew up in rural Mississippi and I was evangelical. And only as I came out of the closet and accepted myself as gay, which was a whole ordeal as it is for many gay men here, did I start questioning kind of the views I grew up in the place I was from. But I mean, I think if you look at poll after poll of people who, are probably Trump supporters, a lot of them, if you ask about his policies, you don't tether it to him or the Republican Party, will oppose his worst policies. And a lot of them, will say they support more progressive policies when you ask about those policies without attaching it to Trump or a party. And there's just this disconnect in the electorate and the media. And I'm not in the media people consume, people are in these social media silos, and I'm not trying to defend them or saying you need to pity them, but I think we need to understand, I think we need more understanding of how difficult it is to reach people. Donna Ladd, she's our executive editor at the Mississippi Free Press. She wrote an essay in her Democracy series this week at the Mississippi Free Press, MississippiFreePress.org. I'd urge people to read it, titled "Whiteness is an Ancient Con. We Must Win the Game Together," where she talks about...
it's an absolutely beautiful piece of writing.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. And she talks about growing up in Neshoba County. She was a child when the Mississippi burning murders happened there. Yep. And she talks about how the powerful have always stoked hate and division and suspicion of people's neighbors to maintain power. And one thing she wrote in there was this quote. I'll read. You don't have to agree with everyone to have grace to forgive and work with them, because it really does take a diverse coalition of brave people willing to step up and out for others. And I think that's something really important for people to understand. Not everyone gets to the same place at the same time, but you have to give people grace and room to grow and be willing to welcome people in.
Yep.
If we're going to defeat fascism in this country, because at the end of the day, it's not really, I'm not as worried about a political party's well-being as I am about fascism and whether or not we can defeat it, whatever that looks like.
All right, so let me just stop you there, because you covered a lot of ground.
Yes, sorry about that.
You started with, we got some criticism because we didn't ask this family how they voted. And I just want to stop on that for a second, because my show is largely about politics here and about American democracy. But not everything about American democracy is best framed in politics. And the story you did about a man being taken away by ICE is a profound story that impacts American politics, probably more so because you didn't focus it on American politics. Sometimes just telling the stories solves this problem that you then spoke about later, which was you got a lot of people who are voting and they've just forever voted Republican because it's the Christian thing to do, because, it's in the water, basically, but they don't pay that much attention. And if they're going to pay attention and somebody says, oh, Democrat, Republican, their radar is going to go one way or another. But if you just tell stories of the consequences of the governing decisions on people's lives, it matters. Mm-hmm. It breaks down that ignorance that we have about the impact of the politics. And people are like, how did that happen? And then you're going to read and you're going to say, well, the police said, the ICE guy said, look, we're only doing this because Donald Trump's president. And people are going to go, oh, I get that. And that's a much more human way to tell the story than to say, oh, laugh, you voted for Trump and look what's happening to you. That's like a cheap shot.
Right. That's exactly it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to do in the media is get back to humanity and putting humanity and people first, because there's just so much of our national media and the way stories are reported in terms of, oh, this is a win for Republicans, or this is a win for Democrats, or this is a blow to President Trump, or something that makes it all about the political players, but doesn't say, is this a win for you? Is this a win for people? How does this affect actual humans, actual Americans? People care more about that than that's why it helps Democrats.
One of the great tragedies of the last 20 years is the collapse of local news around the country, because local news, no matter where you are, whether you're in Mississippi or Minnesota, local news tells the story of the people who live in a place. Always does. And it's a fabulous, important part of building trust, because I use this example a lot. If somebody in the Mississippi Free Press writes that Ashton Pittman just opened a new restaurant, the people there can go see for themselves, and it affirms the reality they live in, as opposed to it's a win for Trump or it's not, and people can argue about that.
Right. People need to be able to see how things matter to their lives, and we ask people to make so many connections that we don't give them the ability to make. And people need to see that. You need to be able to live in community, and part of living in community with the people around you. We're so alienated from one another, and increasingly so with social media and the collapse of local media. But it even just things like, seeing your niece or nephew in your local newspaper for winning a championship or something, those kind of things connect people and they matter, and we are losing that, and it's making the polarization in our country worse, and the hate, because we're not seeing each other as humans the way we used to. And so that's why we do stories the way Nick did this story. Nick Juden did this story.
I thought it was great. I'm not as pessimistic as you about that. I think new communities are forming in new and interesting ways, some of them even online. I have a community of folks here because of this radio show that, people call in, you get to know each other. There are interesting communities forming, and it's a new thing.
Right. And I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. I think we can turn it around, but I think that over the past 20 years we have gone in the wrong direction. But I do think we can turn it around, and that's part of our mission too, is to turn that around.
Yeah. I mean, there are, in Mississippi, you've had your share of cruelty, but that doesn't make Mississippi unique. I mean, you had enslavement and Jim Crow and all of that, but we up here had, industrial power that crushed workers. We had redlining and contract sales that stole piles of money from black migrants from your state who came here and were treated appallingly. So cruelty is not a regional. Nobody's a regional monopoly on that. But
and even to this day, California and New York have higher school segregation rates than Mississippi does. So,
So
you're exactly
we got all of that. But also, no part of the country has a monopoly on grace. They're just beautiful things happening in every part of the country, and it is not the habit of our news media. It hasn't been since Watergate, when everybody wants to be cynical all the time, to tell the good stories, to remind people that, oh my gosh, there are people in this neighborhood who are doing remarkable things, or even your government has done something pretty good. And I think right now, as the things that government are doing that's good are being taken away, people are beginning to notice, wait a minute, that plane shouldn't have fallen out of the sky. Wait a minute, that report should have been based on actual sources rather than made up sources. What do you mean you've just gotten rid of all of the efforts to get a vaccine you were close to for HIV? People are beginning to notice the government actually did good things. And some of that unreported. Yes. We didn't talk about it.
I totally agree. One of our reporters, Torshita Jackson, recently, we've all been having stories like this. She recently did a story on a farm-to-school grant at a local school in Jackson. And it talks both about what this program, this USDA program, was doing for the school, and how it was bringing the kids together to learn about nutrition and to grow things and to give food to the community. And this program has just been cut. And I think that putting things in terms of community and framing them that way helps people see it a lot more than framing it just narrowly in terms of partisan politics.
Yeah, absolutely right. I didn't set out to do this, but I'm drawn to the work that you guys do. I think it's fabulous. You're punching way above your weight.
Thank you.
In the stuff that you do. And I'm glad that, Bill Kristol and others are noticing, and it's not just, a few people around the country, but more and more people are coming to see that first-rate journalism, brave enough to talk about some of the most painful and difficult issues in America, is coming, from a scrappy startup in Mississippi.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you, noticing us and lifting us up, and caring about Mississippi, because I always tell people that you've got to pay attention to what happens in Mississippi, because Mississippi is just America. It's we're kind of a mirror for the rest of the country, I think.
Yeah, in some ways. Well, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. And let's, I'm going to keep reading. We'll do it again.
All right. Thank you so much. It was great being on.
Take care. All right, everybody. We're going to go from Mississippi to Washington. After a quick break, I'm going to talk to Alice Dukas of the Center for American Progress about healthcare. You want to hear that?
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Andrea Dukas is Vice President for Health Policy at the Center for American Progress. She comes to that job from a career in health policy and in what you really need to do to make policy work in healthcare, which is systemic change. Which really means that unlike the current crowd leading our government's healthcare organizations, she knows the difference between facts, systems, outcomes on the one hand, and stupid sound bites on the other. I'm guessing she also doesn't ever, write reports that fake sources and do all that kind of stuff that characterizes the government's response to healthcare these days. Andrea, welcome.
Hi, thanks for the invite to be here. And yes, I try not to do those things.
Yeah. Hey, it's been a minute since I've had a guest on from American Progress. Would you just take a few seconds and tell everybody about the organization?
Sure. So Center for American Progress is a nonpartisan nonprofit policy and research institute that tries to advance progressive policies, primarily at the federal level, but we also try to advance progressive policies at the state level as well.
Yeah, back in the day when I was running the Chicago Sun-Times, I partnered with you guys to do some state issue work. It was very interesting. You're a terrific organization.
We very much appreciate hearing that.
Well, okay, so let's turn to the sort of the core of your world. Let's talk about the big, beautiful bill. What would passage of this mean for the health of Americans?
Oh, man. Well, that's a great question. And I would say that it would be nothing short of a disaster for Americans' health. The big, beautiful bill enacts the biggest cuts to Medicaid in the program's history. And for your listeners, Medicaid is the health insurance program that primarily provides coverage to very, very low-income people, to poor American individuals and families, and also people living with disabilities. So, my brother, for example, he's developmentally and intellectually disabled. He's an adult. He's on Medicaid in the state of Florida. A lot of older people who are on Medicare also wind up going on to Medicaid to help afford long-term care services. So it's a very big program. It's the largest public insurer in the country, or it's the largest single insurer in the country, I should say. There's about 80 million people on Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program. And what this proposal would do to that program is try to decimate it. So up until the Affordable Care Act was passed, federal dollars did not support state Medicaid programs that provided coverage to adults who didn't have kids or didn't have disabilities. So there were a lot of people who were uninsured, who were very low income, working in jobs like gig work that didn't offer coverage and had unreliable hours. And after the law was passed, states had the option to grow their Medicaid programs, expand their Medicaid programs to offer those types of people coverage, which was a lifeline for millions and millions and millions of Americans. Ever since then, Republicans in Congress have been sort of hell-bent on trying to claw that back. And what this bill would do is try to kick as many people off of the program who fall into that group as humanly possible. And they would do that by enacting a mountain of paperwork. So forcing those people to prove they are who they are, like constantly requiring them for the very first time to prove that they have jobs or that they are disabled or that they have caregiving responsibilities and therefore shouldn't be required to have a job, even though like 92% of people on the program are either working or in school or caregiving or can't work because they're ill. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, these are the gold standard number crunching experts that work for Congress, right? They estimate that over 10 million people with Medicaid are going to lose their coverage as a result of the provisions in this bill. So it would really, really, really go after the Medicaid program in a pretty horrible way. The bill would also make it very, very hard for people who buy coverage on their own through the Affordable Care Act marketplaces. My dad was one of those people, also in Florida, to get the help they need to buy coverage. Almost everybody who buys coverage through the Affordable Care Act marketplaces gets a tax credit to help offset the cost. This bill would fail to extend the extra help, the extra money that people get in the form of tax credits that enable them to afford their coverage, and also push people into plans with higher deductibles and copays. So, again, that group, that Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimates that once that happens, another 5 million people are going to lose their coverage. So it's a pretty big, dramatic change to the American health coverage landscape.
Well, it's hard to get my head around that. What does America look like with an additional 15 million uninsured? What happens to what does that? I mean, how does that impact? Say people who continue to have their insurance.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let me zoom out and say it's going to impact everybody in different ways, right? So the people who lose their coverage, they're pretty extreme impacts, right? Like if you have cancer, if you have diabetes and you don't have health insurance, your cancer, your diabetes, it doesn't go away, right? You still have your underlying health conditions. So at the extreme end, what happens with people who are sick, who lose their coverage, is they could die, right? Or they could have very, very bad health outcomes, or their family could go bankrupt, right? So for the people who lose their coverage, there's immediate ramifications. But, for everyone else, right, what you expect to see is costs start to shift, right? So again, people's coverage needs don't go away, but we've also done some math about how much more hospitals and healthcare providers, for example, would be forced to shoulder in uncompensated care costs when people show up at those facilities and can't pay their bill, right? And that's $48 billion, right? We expect that to go up per year, which is not a small number. And then, on top of that, there are other provisions in this bill that would limit how much states are able to raise in terms of how much money states are able to raise through taxes to help finance their Medicaid program and pay for things like, the group home that my brother goes to in Florida or lives in Florida, or, outpatient physical therapy, or pediatric inpatient psychiatric care. All those things, those are optional services that states look for creative ways to finance, and those would be on the chopping block if all of a sudden states are losing billions of dollars in federal support for their Medicaid programs. Yeah. Okay. So everybody's going to be feeling it.
Well, so I expect if we're talking about shifting $48 billion burden onto hospital systems across the country, that many will just close because they can't afford it. I expect when 15 million people lose coverage, that means that they will probably be too sick to work, many of them, and certainly their family members will have to take care of them full time, so they'll leave the workforce. So it has an enormous impact on our economy, negative impact on our economy, which will impact tax revenue. So this is a money-losing proposition for the government.
100%. And there have been lots of other studies, too, that have demonstrated that, including studies that show just how many jobs might get lost by state. I mean, it's really, this is a job killer. It's a revenue killer. It's a people killer.
So what's the excuse for it? What is the rationale that the American right wing gives for this kind of stupidity?
That is the worst part of all, right? Because this is not a bill that is being debated or put forward to try to instill fiscal responsibility or try to make any of these programs work better. The entire purpose of this bill is to extend expiring tax cuts that primarily benefit very, very, very wealthy people in America. So the only reason these Medicaid cuts are in the bill is to find savings that offset revenue losses from the tax cuts. It's really, people have described it as, it sounds really technical, right? People have described it as a reverse Robin Hood, and that's exactly what it is. It would take money away from the poorest people, take resources away from the poorest people to disproportionately benefit the wealthiest people in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear, because often in our politics, because most people in America aren't the poorest people in America, they say, well, that doesn't really impact me. But in fact, as you and I've already discussed, This is going to impact everybody. It's going to take things away from everyone except the very, very wealthiest.
Yeah, that's right. And, we've been talking about health, right? This is coming back to coverage, right? Even people with job-based coverage, they don't realize that, like, a lot of what sets the tone, right, for what coverage, like what the parameters of coverage looks like, is set based on other programs, right? So changes to the marketplace that are in this bill, for example, would actually have an impact on your potential out-of-pocket costs for your job-based coverage, too. It could raise your out-of-pocket costs, your maximum out-of-pocket limit by, close to $1,000. So it's not like anybody's going to be immune, Yep.
All right, let's talk about the work requirements that are in this bill. I know that the right wing has long wanted to say anyone who gets help from the government, unless it's the help in the form of corporate help, where we just have corporate welfare, any human who gets help is somehow a taker and doing something bad for the country. So they demand these burdensome work requirements. But most of the people who get this help, they are working. And I think you mentioned it by saying bury them in paperwork. The work requirements here are less really work requirements than they are documentation requirements, right? That are really going to make it impossible. They're burying people in paperwork so they can't get the benefits.
That's exactly right. And that's the only purpose, right? So again, these Medicaid provisions are in the bill to generate savings, right? The only way for a work requirement to save money is for somebody to lose their coverage. So if overnight, if this were fixing a problem that we know does not exist, right? So say nobody on the Medicaid program worked, and overnight we required them to report that they're working, and they all went to work, nobody would lose their coverage, and the government wouldn't save any money, right? So the only reason they are in this bill is so that millions of people will lose their coverage, which will generate hundreds of billions of dollars in savings to the federal government. So, I mean, it's very, very, very clear. And I was just this morning, there was a video going around of Senator Ernst in Iowa, right, who was at her town hall, and somebody said, I'm really worried that these cuts are going to kill me. And the response wasn't like, oh, no, this is just smart policy. It was, oh, well, we're all going to die, which was just shocking. Like the level of indifference, like willful indifference to these coverage losses is shocking. And I mention that because they know, Republicans in Congress know what they're doing with these work requirements. They know the only goal is to kick people off of coverage. And we know that they know this because we have data. We have real world data about what happens when states try to do this, which is they result in massive coverage losses, by and large, among people eligible for the program, right? So if they were trying to help encourage job growth or help encourage people to, land on their feet, this is not what they would be doing. The goal would be ripping health care away from people.
No, it's positively Charles Dickens. Are there no workhouses? I mean, it's just awful. So we've covered. Let me ask you about one other thing that I think they are trying to do. This government thinks, they have sort of a tech idea of the world, and the tech world has made a lot of money over the last 30 years by figuring out ways that software can replace humans in work. And I've already seen the administration cut back on Biden-era requirements that have to do with staffing levels at like nursing homes. Is it their thinking that we will be just more efficient in the delivery of healthcare, or healthcare will just be worse?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's an open question. On the nurse staffing ratio, I think that's sort of a fascinating issue where we know, again, the data shows that when you have ratios with a smaller number of patients to nurses, patients have much better outcomes, right? And we know that you actually want job growth, right? Like if you actually enhance those staffing ratios or lower those staffing ratios, you actually have to hire more nurses. And we know that we would be better off right, with more health professionals in this country. But in order to hire more people, nursing homes have to spend more money, right? Like they have to hire. So that's the push and pull, right? Like, oh, we won't be able to recruit, or oh, we have to pay too much money. So you look at the trade-offs there, and I think we need to sort of zoom out and have more of like a fundamental values question, which is what do we want to be paying for? Like what kind of health system do we think we owe the American public, right? The most affluent country in the world that strives to have the best healthcare system in the world. Really, do we really want to settle for what we have now and do so just because we are beholden to special interests, or do we want to break out of that and actually deliver something that's going to work for people?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the big picture, because what modern medicine can do is miraculous, and more miraculous than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But the experience of being a medical consumer is worse than it was for almost everyone. The long waits, the endless, I don't even know what it is, the owners of the hospital surveying you every 4 minutes to do a satisfaction survey so they can, I don't know, do what? Not make you happier. It's a very strange experience now. What is going on in healthcare that has so displaced the experience of the patient?
Yeah, well, there's a few different things. One is,
I might add, let me interrupt for 1 second, and the experience of the doctors and nurses, because they're not happy either.
They are not happy either. You're 100% right. So this is not necessarily unique to healthcare, but, one of the things we've seen over the past 20 years is a real dramatic increase in like the corporatization of medicine, financialization of medicine, right? And concentrated market power. So more and more hospitals are consolidating. You've got these giant entities that are starting to look like, like 12 armed squid, right? Mm-hmm. Where the hospital is also the insurer, which is also the pharmacy, which is also the PBM, which also owns the doctors. So they're now these just like behemoths, right? And there's so many communities around the country where there's only one real big player in town, which might be all of those things. And when any one entity has too much market power, right, they abuse it. And they can use that market power to extract as much profit as possible, right, or rent as possible. And they do that in different ways, right? Cutting back on what providers are doing, making it harder for people to either get services or use their coverage, right? So there's a little bit of that happening. And as that's been occurring, there's also been a really rapid rise in the growth of private equity investments in the healthcare space, not only with respect to hospitals, but also with it's sort of like in every sector: dentists, gynecologists, oncology, cancer care, cardiology, right? They're going everywhere. And the private equity model is sort of fundamentally at odds with healthcare, because the model is extract as much profit as possible and then move on, right? Or have a bundle of companies knowing that a bunch of them will fail, but that's okay because you get one really great source of revenue. But that doesn't work in a healthcare setting where really what the mission of a provider needs to be is to deliver quality care to patients. So those are market trends, again, that are not totally unique to healthcare. You see things that are similar in the housing space, education space, but it's part of how, markets in America have been changing. We feel it very acutely in the healthcare system because healthcare is such an enormous part of our economy and everybody uses the healthcare system. But it's driving people crazy, and it's driving doctors crazy too.
So you've described the healthcare system. It's a little bit like going down the grocery store aisle in cereal, where you think you have lots of competition because there are hundreds of different kinds of cereal, right? But the prices don't go down. And then you realize there are two companies that own every cereal brand. So there's not real competition, and instead, as you say, there's rent-seeking behavior, which is economists talk for we're going to make money without doing anything for our consumers.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So we've spent, I don't know, almost 20 minutes or so on the big bad bill. And of course, it's a big bad bill in every aspect of our lives, not just healthcare. But there are other parts of the government that are focused on healthcare. Do you have any thoughts about the impact of, say, not recommending COVID vaccines anymore, or the other things that we see coming out of not Congress, but the executive branch on healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you asked that. That's been really, really alarming. Having somebody like RFK Jr. at the helm of Health and Human Services, which is just I continue to just be beside myself that that's the case. But you have this person who is just anti-vaccine, lunatic, really. I couldn't think of a kinder word to describe him, but someone who's just been on a crusade over the past 25 years of his career to try to discredit medical science. Having somebody like that at the helm of the Department of Health and Human Services is just so scary. And we're already seeing what happens, right? We had a process we used to follow with scientific advisors, scientists, medical doctors, right? People who, advisory committees that would meet and debate the evidence and have discussions about, these are the vaccines to recommend and put on the childhood vaccine schedule, and here's what we follow, and da-da-da. And he just decided, no, not going to do that on my own. I'm just going to go ahead, somebody with no medical training whatsoever, and say we're not recommending the COVID vaccine anymore for kids or pregnant women. And for pregnant women, it's especially indicated because they can have really bad outcomes. That's insane. And this comes on the heels of him at a Senate hearing saying, you shouldn't be taking medical advice from me, which is probably the best thing he said to anyone. And then, which was in the news today, last week, they produced that MAHA report, that Make America Healthy Again report, which the New York Times discovered, involved a whole bunch of made-up citations. They cited studies that didn't exist. Probably that to me suggests maybe they used ChatGPT or something to write the report. I don't know. But, I mean, that's who's in charge of the nation's, health agency. That's crazy. So I am very, very worried about that. Yeah.
So we have an executive branch that doesn't value expertise, that understands its political survival depends on Americans believing in conspiracy theories rather than facts. And you have now Congress sacrificing the health of America and the economy of America so that they can make 1% of America a little richer, or a lot richer, but they're so rich already that the increment won't change their lives. It'll change all of our lives. But when you have $8 billion and you get the next billion, you're not going to be able to spend it any faster. It won't change their lives. It'll change our lives.
Yeah, and what's so frustrating about all of this is there's just so much shock and awe happening right now out of the federal government and so much noise that people don't even fully understand what's happening, right? It's so few people. When I look at the local news coverage about the big, beautiful bill, it's really not breaking through the way that it should. I mean, people are not supportive of these policies. And
not at all.
If they understood that they were happening, they would be horrified. So that's what feels especially frustrating. It's just it's not, what's going on in Washington is not top of mind for the majority of people in this country. And it's not because they don't care. They would care a lot. It's just, it's not reaching them.
Yeah. And the problems that Republicans, majority in Congress and in the White House, are creating aren't fixable just by winning a next election. It's much harder to rebuild after you break things. And they are really breaking things. Yeah. All right, let me ask you one other thing. You know that working with government, with any administration on policy, means there's a good faith conversation that has to happen. Data is shared, policy organizations like yours, you spend time, you analyze, you make recommendations, there's a discussion, then there's often a rulemaking process, in some cases a lawmaking process with hearings, but it's evidence-based almost entirely. Sometimes administrations who don't want to help are slow to comply with data requests. But I'm actually worried now that for the first time, when they share data with you, it might be fake. It might not be real.
Yep.
I mean, you'll usually be able to say, okay, we can disagree about what it means, but we trusted the data that came from the government. It was the gold standard of the way after all, the word statistics came out of the French use for data from the state. It used to be something that we trusted as gold standard. How do we do policy going forward when the government makes up data?
Yeah, I mean, that is the scary question, right? And there's not a clear answer. I mean, fortunately, it's very helpful when professional societies, scientists, right, experts actually come out and push back against data that's not real. It's very helpful, for example, that people have stood up and said, like, we didn't write that, right? We don't have a study that says that. They're misinterpreting our results. Very helpful. But it's really challenging. I mean, like, at the very beginning of the administration, what we saw was websites being pulled down, surveys being pulled down, different things getting scrubbed, words, right, coming out of survey instruments, and that really jeopardizes our ability to monitor things over time, as you say, to trust the data sources. And there's not an easy answer to the question, right? Like, we already are living in a time, we already know what it's like because we had this happen during the first administration, but now, too, we are in a time where, like, most people understand that when President Trump makes statements, right, half of what he says is not true, or he just makes it up, and they're like, oh, that's fine. Like, we know he doesn't what he says.
Forgive me, what's the other half?
Good question. I'm just like rambling. Yeah. Talking about whales and windmills and whatever.
And trophy wives, yeah. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but that in and of itself, right, should be alarming that people are desensitized to, the president just like openly lying. They just expect that, right? So I do really worry about that, and I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I'm confident that part of the answer, it continues to be honest policy work that looks at the complex issues Americans face and tries to find the best path forward. And that we have made a lot of progress doing that in our history, and I'm not ready to give it up just because at the moment we have a would-be king who doesn't care. So I really value your work.
And we're going to keep trying to hold them to account and doing the analytical work that, we think is gold standard too.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your work. Love American Progress. And I tell people, Andrea, how they can just, find the work and if they want to learn more, what they should do.
Yes, absolutely. So visit AmericanProgress.org. We are also on all the various social platforms if you prefer to engage that way. But with respect to this bill, one of the best things you can do, and you can find this on our website, AmericanProgress.org, is to use your voice, right, to lift it up and to say, we don't support this bill. If you are on Medicaid or you know somebody who's on Medicaid, somebody in your family might have been on it or is on it, or you know somebody on SNAP who gets assistance buying food, share your story. That's really, really, really powerful. We have all sorts of ways for you to share that story. We try to make it as easy as possible because that's what policymakers listen to. They want to know, and it's important that they know that what they're debating is not abstract, right? These numbers are actually real people. So, sharing your story, lifting up your concerns, that's the best thing you can possibly do.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Hope we talk again.
Thank you.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All righty, Jim, kick us off.
Hi, Edwin. In my political experience, I've never had to deal with CPAC, the Heritage Foundation, Hillsdale College, Prager University, you name it. The Heritage Foundation speaker, where they got this gentleman, I have no idea. But they treated him as if he was sacrosanct. Whatever he was saying was gospel. He said, well, the reason we got to get rid of these foreign students is because for 25 years they've been anti-capitalist and they're Harpo Marxists. They didn't say Harpo, but he said Marxist. That's my incantation for that. And this is a philosophy. And their philosophy is whoever holds the gold holds the power. In other words, we'll dictate to you, their crypto scheme and its crazy family trying to get as rich as they possibly can. And then if we're the richest, we'll dictate to you. Well, Edwin, that's not the America I grew up in. I mean, I'll stack up the Democratic scores over the Republicans any day of the week, pound for pound. I mean, I don't want to go over them. I mean, from pro-union to Social Security to Medicare to Medicaid to HUD housing to, give me a list for the Republicans. I'm at a loss to even think of one.
Yeah, sure. Cut everybody's taxes, shrink the government to nothing. Yeah. Cut the taxes to nothing for the richest people, shrink government to nothing, and let everybody fend for themselves.
Right. And then property rights overtake human rights because if we've got all the property, you've got rights left. Well, that's a feudalist system that went out 500 years ago. But you have to admit that they are going completely backwards with these organizations. In my civics class, I never was taught that a Republican or a Democrat were philosophically apart. We were Americans. I never heard a president say that we're maniac leftists and students are maniac leftists, etc. I've never heard that in my life. We were taught that we were Americans. We were American. I was proud to be an American. But I'm certainly not going to be buffaloed by a bunch of philosophical we have no philosophy at all. The only philosophy is we want power one way or the other. And then you've got the internet for 14 or 15 years. But it was disheartening for me. They said Gen Z, 25% of them, 75% didn't know what Memorial Day was. That's kind of concerning. So my point is, in our, in higher institutions, since when have they been? I've never walked into a class or anywhere where they said that the Republicans or Democrats had a particular philosophy. Anyway, thank you, Edwin. You have a great week. Thank you.
Nope, appreciate the contribution. Really do, Jim. All right, Dave, what do you think?
Hey, Edwin. Yeah, I don't know if you picked up on the story about where Trump's vanity parade, as we can call it, is going to come with a hefty price tag now. And it's going to displace Vietnam veterans from an event. And Jen Psaki reports that Trump's upcoming military parade is expected to cost as much as $45 million, not counting cleanup and road repairs and afterwards. And this spectacle will also force an annual event for the Vietnam veterans to be moved away from the Vietnam War Memorial. Now, isn't that rich? A guy who called troops suckers and losers and at Arlington Cemetery and then looking at those headstones and saying, I don't get it, what it was in it for them. And when him and retired General John Kelly, as they were at his son's grave at Arlington, and as you know, at this vanity parade, there'll be no maimed or wounded troops there. Remember the last time he said, that's not a good look for me. Remember?
I think the
When he
idea
was,
that he's trying to politicize our military is one of the more dangerous among many dangerous things he's doing. And Americans should not watch it. We should pay no attention to it. We should boycott it. I want to say at the same time he's doing that, I think I heard that the Pope is coming to the United States, and he will
I
be
heard
the new
somebody.
Pope,
Yeah.
and he will be in Chicago, where he's from, and I hope that millions of people tune into that and pay no attention to the man behind the bombs in Washington.
In fact, earlier in the week, I had mentioned to Joan on her show that on that day, anybody that's liberal or progressive ought to hang their American flags upside down. And as I was going to the store this morning, I seen a guy on his window of his car. He had it might have been about a 3x6, 3x5 American flag upside down on his window of his car. So
I don't want us to tear apart, and I don't want our animosities to create room for for him to perfect his fascism. We have to reach out to each other and remind everybody that we are all in the same boat. And it's a good boat, so let's not drill any more holes in it. It has some work to do, but yeah.
Before I get off, another earlier one too with Joan, I read that tomorrow Poland's going to be having the presidential election, and there's down to a stark ideological choice. One is a liberal pro-European mayor versus a staunch nationalist conservative, and they're polling so close that the outcome is impossible to predict in a runoff round tomorrow. And it's just not a domestic affair. Trump is throwing his weight behind the nationalist candidate, and he's telling them that. Yeah, and he's saying that he's dangling the prospect of closer military ties if polls shows him over the liberal Warsaw mayor. And I know last time when he was in that first term, that other president Duda, he had even promised to build a fort, call it Fort Trump that time, if he could get, to move troops over, permanent, like into Poland, like our troops are in Germany and stuff like that. He wanted that to happen. So,
Poland's democracy is very fragile. It was in an autocratic moment. They fought and got it back, but they may not be able to keep it. It's
we'll have to watch if they give some reports, on the news. We'll have to see what happens. But anyway, thanks for taking the call, Edwin. Let others get in and have their say. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Yep, I'm at 773-763-9278. Eduardo, what's going on in Florida?
Yeah, Edwin, well, trying to stay dry. But Iran, I saw the story here. So they're thinking they're up to 10 nuclear bombs, and this is not good. And I'm afraid there's going to be hit this year, and we still got this issue with the Russians and Ukraine. So this is not good. We're going to have both of these conflicts going on at the same time. It's very disturbing.
It is appalling. And, we had a deal that would have prevented Iran from moving forward with their nuclear capabilities. But the Republicans and Donald Trump tore it up last time he was in office. He's promised to go to war with Iran if they get a nuclear weapon. I don't know what to make of Donald Trump's promises because he can't count on them to mean anything, but it's enormously dangerous, right? And Bibi Netanyahu's promised to blow up any nuclear storage sites, any place where there's a chance that Iran could have a nuclear weapon. So that dangerous part of the world is more dangerous than ever. We still have the war in Ukraine going full on. The world is not getting more safe because of Donald Trump. The world is getting less safe. We replaced competence with incompetent ideological thugs. And Eduardo, it's not helping anyone anywhere. And I mean, these are the government things you're talking about, but the cuts to USAID have led to, countless deaths already around the world and destabilization of countries where, we were providing food and now their populations are hungry and governments are going to get overthrown. And the world is becoming more dangerous by the second because of the inhumanity and stupidity of the people in the White House and Congress. They're lackeys. I'm sorry, I don't feel strongly about it or anything.
Yeah. Well, let's pray for the best. Okay, Edwin, thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right, 773-763-9278. And I was about to read you something, but Roosevelt has called, and I want to get to Roosevelt. So, Roosevelt, come on. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Double E?
Thank you.
Hey, listen. I can answer that question for you, and it was an easy one. What's going on in Florida? There's a lot of things going on in Florida. Did you hear about the AG on that judge that want to hold them contempt of court because of these laws that they're trying to pass, or they passed? The governor. One, did they ever pass that 14-year-olds could work after school? All that ridiculous, going back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. Did they ever pass that? Because I know the governor
Florida is I love Florida. I love the people of Florida. Their government is appallingly backwards. I mean, how can they're sinking, and they say there's no climate change.
And I'm going to stay on the same subject because a lot of it comes from there. And as a matter of fact, all those people that they bust, they came from Florida to Chicago. They are as much to blame for the fact that Trump is in the White House because that affected our local Democratic candidates when it came down to voting. It really put the mayor focus, put our governor in focus, and it wasn't any fault of our own. What I mean by our own is our Democratic Progressive Party.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm kicking it. Well, go ahead.
I think Florida's going to change. David Jolly is a party switcher. He's Democrat now, I think, and he's going to run for governor of Florida. And I have a lot of hope that the good people of Florida are sick of being pawns in that right-wing fantasy scheme. They're sick of being told they got to ban books. They're sick of being told, what they can and can't say.
I'm glad you brought that one up.
Yeah.
That's another one. And you know what? While we're in the subject, I don't know. Well, we got a lot of time. Okay, so while I'm in the subject, let's go around the bend here with all the stuff in Florida. And not only Florida, Texas, but it's mostly Florida. And that is this. The TPS. That's going to affect directly all those people that Biden gave TPS for. Am I saying that right? TPS? Temporary... The temporary status?
Yes, temporary protective status. Yes.
Protective, yeah. So I think close to 500,000.
I didn't know earlier in the show, and I said it was 300,000. It's actually a little over 500,000.
I think you're right. But they're throwing these numbers around, so it's between 350 and 500. Now that's going to affect Venezuelans, Cubans. And that's where I'm heading to, Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans. And that's where I'm heading to. Those people in Florida, those people, and specifically Cuban Republicans that kissed the butt of this guy, there's a particular one that's a snake, Maria Elvira Salazar. Are you familiar with her? She took credit.
Not.
Oh, well, I'm going to fill you in. She took credit for $600,000 that directly went when Biden passed that bipartisan infrastructure law, okay? It directly affected Dade County in Florida, and she took credit for it. You should see the video. You should see the pictures. She posed with a giant check, just like as she won the lot, as if she won the lotto. And there's a local reporter that took her to task. The video is in there. It's by maybe 6-7 months ago. Invited her, and it's called Facing South Florida. The name is the name of the guy is Jim Defeed, Defede, the chubby gentleman. But he was very direct to her and says, "Why are you taking credit for something you voted against?" And she took it. And so that same person and the Republican rep from Florida, Cuban American, of course, also, and the other one, Ballard. I'm sure you're familiar with Ballard. They've been there forever.
Yeah.
So those three people lied to those Venezuelans and all those people that are being deported thanks to Trump because they lied. They said that he wouldn't touch TPS, and they're not doing anything for those people. All they wanted was the vote, and Venezuelans, 2023 to be specific, Biden gave him the TPS, okay? And this guy, all he had to do was basically sign his name, renew it. That's all he had to do. And those people are going to be affected. But you know, the people down there, I don't want to say Latinos, because Cuban Americans, I cannot name me one Cuban American, whether Democratic or Republican. I'll give you the Democratic one. The guy from New Jersey, Democratic guy that was crooked, that had bars of gold. They called him, what's his name? Yeah, there you go. So you cannot name me in the past 40, 50 years a good Republican Cuban American politician. They're all crooked, and they all kiss whoever the leader is. They did it with all the candidates. As soon as they go to Florida, you know, they don't ask any questions. They're basically busboys. They're basically waiters for the Republican Party, no matter who it is. So it doesn't surprise me that Trump can't call it the Republican Party. It's the Trump MAGA Party to me, as far as I'm concerned. So a lot of it is happening. And here's another thing, too. Those people are going to be suffering because a lot of the stuff that oranges, a lot of stuff that's grown, they're kicking all those people out, undocumented workers, and all that stuff is going to go up. And back to the same thing that he did on his first term, which is he's going to bail all the Agra people, bail them out. He's going to give them money, and that's going to be it. And they keep on voting for him. I'm sure I'm not mistaken when it comes down to the majority of the rural in every state, to be honest with you, even Illinois, they voted for this guy again. And I'm sure you've seen the social media, how all these people are sorry that they ever gave him the vote. You know,
which is, I'm so welcome back. I don't blame Americans for not paying as close attention to politics as you and I do. I want them to be able to get on with their lives. And really, truly, Donald Trump was unimaginably bad. And by unimaginable, I mean people didn't imagine it. So a lot of the people who voted for him say, "Oh yeah, that sounds good," or "Oh yeah, Republicans are supposed to be good with money," whatever it is they think. It's turned out none of it's true. I mean, it's sort of perfect, terrible storm. And we're all paying the price. And if they pass this bill, Roosevelt, if they pass this bill, this reconciliation bill, the America that led the world for the last, 70 years is gone. And humanity is going to have to look elsewhere for scientific leadership, for entrepreneurial leadership, for arts and culture, for human rights. We will be in it's like Europe in the 700s descending into the Dark Ages, because this bill undoes all of those things that have made America a leader in the world. And they embrace it. They are so angry about everything. They hate you and me so much that they're willing to do this. And it is The way we beat them is by saying, you know what, we don't hate you, we love you. Come on, just let's build a country together. None of this. Let's stop lying to each other. Let's do the right thing for America.
But Double E, I tend to disagree with you a little bit, just slightly, and let me tell you why. You know, these people that plant their crops and everything, they're not dumb. They know about politics. You cannot tell me that the first time around, remember when he gave billions of dollars to the Arab people that voted for him and bailed them out because, okay, so then I could go along with what you're saying the first time around, but this is the second time around and they did it again. So you can't tell me
I wish they'd known better.
Exactly. They did. Yeah. And that's my point, Double E. They did know better. But because they point to us as cities, they point to us and they don't want money. And it's to me, I hate to say this, but it's to me, as far as I'm concerned, it's a spiteful thing. They don't want any money going to dark-skinned people, period. So they think, this is what they think, and you know it's a fact. They think that all us cities, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, they think that their taxes are going to all these dark-skinned people, and it's the other way around. They're the ones that, meaning the southern states, the red states, the Republican states, the money goes to them. They collect more food stamps. As a matter of fact, they're going to be hurt more than we are. I mean, we're all in it together because of the fact that this guy won.
Roosevelt, I agree with a lot of that, but like a state like Texas, is very productive, produces a lot of tax revenue for the country. I mean, but Mississippi doesn't. Texas does.
Yeah, but why? What's in Texas, Double E? Why?
Well,
oil.
It's oil, but they also have some, I mean, I always say about Illinois, where I live, great states should have more than one major metropolitan area. Chicago is the only one in Illinois. Yeah. New York's got a bunch. Texas has a bunch. These cities are, I mean, Houston is not an oil city. It's, it's a very vibrant, interesting place.
Well, you made, in a roundabout way, you made a good point, because even Austin, mostly Democratic, from what I understand. Yep. I have family in Houston, and right at the border, Brownsville, you name it. Yeah, I'm very familiar. But you're right. Yeah. You made a good point.
I got to wrap it up because we've run out of time, Roosevelt. But thank you.
You know what? I took a lot of your time, and I appreciate it. And I took a lot of your time, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a nice day. Right. Nice weekend.
You too. And those of you who I didn't get to, we will talk next week in June. So really, truly into summer, and but not time to take off from this fight we are in. Hang in there, everybody, and reach out to your neighbors. Remind them that we are in this together. Take care.